Santa Monica runs on more than sunshine and ocean air. It runs on good information. The Santa Monica Daily Press delivers the local news you need every day, free and independent. But free news isn't free to produce. That's why we need members like you. Join today at smdp.com/membership. The Santa Monica Daily Press, keeping our community informed. Hey everyone, it's Brian. This series sometimes contains adult language and may not be appropriate for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Also, a selection of Santa Monica Daily Press articles that cover the topics in this episode will be included in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. And a reminder to please follow the series and tell your friends. Your support of this podcast and local journalism is both needed and appreciated. Thanks. This music is from one of my favorite sci-fi films of the last couple decades, the Christopher Nolan mind-bending heist movie, Inception. There's a subplot in the film about the main character, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and that character's wife, who spend years in a fantasy land on some nameless coast of a nameless ocean. In the movie, this place is called Limbo.
We built our own world.
How long were you stuck there?
Something like 50 years.
But the thing about Limbo is that over time, it becomes absolutely filled with tall apartment buildings. There are thousands of them, taking up all the available space. In the place I live, Santa Monica, California, housing development is a big and contentious issue. There are some that fear the city could end up just like Limbo from Inception. A glistening ocean, a sun-kissed beach, and then skyscrapers everywhere. There is little doubt that a lot more housing is coming. But what will all that development really mean for Santa Monica? What will become of one of America's most iconic beach cities? I'm Brian Peter Falk, and this is A Developing Story, a limited podcast series from Santa Monica Daily Press. We'll explore housing development one story at a time and try to figure out what those stories tell us about the future and ourselves. This is episode 1, The Numbers Game.
This podcast is supported in part by the Montana Avenue Merchants Association, inviting you to experience the best of Santa Monica. Montana Avenue is home to more than 150 shops, cafes, and restaurants across 10 walkable blocks. From boutique fashion to fitness studios to coffee bars and gourmet dining, it's where locals and visitors come to shop, dine, and unwind. Plan your visit today at montanaave.com.
Santa Monica is a city of 92,000 people and covers 8 square miles between Los Angeles and the Pacific Ocean. It has a famous pier and a Ferris wheel and a beautiful beach. One of its zip codes, 90402, routinely makes the top 10 list for the wealthiest zip codes in America. The city's motto is Populus Felix in Urbe Felice, fortunate people in a fortunate land. Nearly 3/4 of the residential land in Santa Monica is occupied by single-family homes on tree-lined streets. I live in one of them. This is longtime Santa Monica resident, former city council member, and housing advocate, Gleam Davis.
You know, people say, what's the best thing about Santa Monica? Is it the pier? Is it the beach? Is it the airport? Whatever it is. And I go, no, actually, it's really the people. What really impresses me about Santa Monica is almost everyone I know who lives here, they really know their neighbors and they know what's going on. And I think that makes it just a lovely place to live. Although we may not always agree on everything, it truly is a place that has a great sense of community.
One area that Santa Monicans have definitely not agreed on is housing development. This is Santa Monica Daily Press editor-in-chief Matt Hall, who has an encyclopedic grasp of all things Santa Monica.
So housing in Santa Monica isn't just an issue, it is the issue. It is the thing that has defined this city in its modern incarnation. Going back 30 years, the reason Santa Monica is today what it is because we were one of the first places to establish rent control. So housing's the reason that our politicians are the way they are. In many ways, it's the reason our businesses have grown the way they are. It is the single foundation of modern Santa Monica.
But Santa Monica isn't operating in a vacuum. It's part of the state of California, which ranks 50th out of 50 states in housing units per capita. Dead last. Gleam Davis thinks this has something to do with California's enduring popularity.
I think the first thing is that we're victims of our own success, which is we had a lot of people who were coming to California. It was the land of opportunity. And as a result, there was a lot of housing being built. And so people could find housing. It was affordable. We had a lot of industry. I mean, the entirety of Sunset Park in Santa Monica was built by an aircraft manufacturer to house the people who worked in aircraft manufacturing. And so I think that once those activities sort of ground to a halt and there were other lands of opportunity, the housing also ground to a halt. And so while people still continued to move here, we weren't building housing for them.
It's a big problem with a troubled history, one I will go into in further detail in a later episode. But for now, just understand that Governor Gavin Newsom has called the glaring lack of housing California's original sin. Building a lot more of it has become a big imperative for the state.
So state lawmakers have spent decades searching for the solution to this problem. And that solution has often taken the form of different bills in different places, kind of nibbling around the edges of the issue. But those issues have all sort of coalesced and over time taken shape in what we call a housing element, which is this overarching plan that a city has to put in place to guide housing construction over a fixed span of time.
The housing element has been around since the 1960s. It's basically a state mandate that tells municipalities how much new housing they should have. An alphabet soup of players are involved. There's HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. There's RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which is a process run by the HCD. And, for Santa Monica and its neighbors, the unfortunately evil-sounding SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. All of these work with local cities to update the housing element every 8 years. The element's latest cycle, the 6th, was activated in October of 2021. But this one was quite different than its predecessors.
So state regulators have created the housing element, and over time, there are changes. It modifies, it mutates, it grows. One of the things that happened in this particular cycle was a refocusing of the housing element on places that have jobs and that have high transit. Now, secondarily to that, there's also a focus on things like racial equity and social justice and environmental protections. And so all of that coalesced and manifested into areas that have high jobs, are easy to get to, and by default, many of those places tended to be wealthier and well off.
In previous housing elements, they had just tried to put the housing where there was land available to build, which is why you had a lot of building in Chino. But you have people in Chino who work in Santa Monica and then have to drive 2 hours to their jobs. In the last cycle, what they did is they say, this is stupid, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for human beings to be on the road that much, so let's put the housing near the jobs. Santa Monica is a job center, and that's why Santa Monica's numbers seem to many people very high.
Very high is a bit of an understatement. The 5th housing element had called for Santa Monica to add 1,674 units over 8 years. In the 6th housing element, that number jumped to 8,895, a 5-fold increase.
The numbers were a joke. They're not rooted in any reality.
This is Mario Fonda Bonardi, a local architect and self-described slow-growth advocate.
There are limits. There are objective limits to growth. And when you look at those limits, then all of a sudden reality sets in. And reality is quite brutal. It doesn't care who gets elected. It doesn't care who's ahead in the polls. Reality is fairly brutal and looks something like this. The natural growth of Santa Monica, however you think of that, is about 1,100 units every 8 years. That's from the state numbers. That's not a number I cooked up. I did not invent that number. That's what's happening given household formation, the birth rate, the drop of immigration, all those variables that create demand for housing, right? So 1,100 every 8 years, okay, we could probably do that. That's something sustainable for a fair amount of decades. But the state now wants us to produce 9,000 units, about 8 times what we really is our natural growth.
The new housing element number seemed to indicate that the days of natural growth in Santa Monica were over. For context, by last count, Santa Monica has around 50,000 housing units. Nearly 9,000 more would be an additional 18%. And this new growth came with a sharpened focus on affordable housing.
One of the things that the Regional Housing Needs Assessment says is a certain percentage of the housing that you're accommodating must be deed-restricted affordable, meaning it's affordable to people at the lower end of the wealth scale. But that's much harder to build because it's not for-profit housing. Private developers tend not to do it.
Of the almost 9,000 units called for in the sixth housing element, more than 6,000, 2/3, were supposed to be affordable units. And the way that affordable housing is built in California could push the overall number a lot higher. Now, I know that math and podcasts don't really go together, so I've asked Matt Hall to explain this in as simple a way as possible.
You've seen girl math, you've seen boy math, you've seen this dog math, right, where people talk about how they change the way that numbers work to fit their personalities. So you've got housing math. So in housing math, you can build 100% deed-restricted affordable housing buildings. Those do exist, but they're not necessarily the main way that affordable housing gets built. There's this term called inclusionary housing, and what's happening there is you take a developer who's going to build a market rate development to make a boatload of money off of it and say, hey, would you like to make more money if you build some affordable units inside of that market rate development you've got going on? And so you get a percentage game going on where for every 100 units of market rate, you can get 15 units of affordable. And so in the housing math world, if you need 6,000 units of affordable housing, and that's going to be 15% of a total number of housing units that are built, you can do some multiplication there to get to some very high numbers.
So, according to housing math, if you need 6,000 affordable units, you may have to build 30,000 market rate units to get them. These numbers are so head-spinning that Mario Fondabernardi and others have complained of ulterior motives from state and local politicians.
The real purpose of all this housing stuff is not to create more housing. That's a side effect. It's like a drug. The real question was, how can we increase the land value of existing property owners? That's the big game coming out of Sacramento. We're not interested in the number of housing. We're not interested in where the housing is. We're not interested in the kind or quality of housing. We're interested in increasing the property value of landowners because they're the people who are going to donate to our political campaigns.
While I've seen no hard evidence that this accusation is true, I've not been able to get the Department of Housing and Community Development to refute it since my interview request has gone unanswered. Still, accusations like this do point to how divisive the sixth housing element quickly became. We'll get into that after this.
This podcast is brought to you in part by St. John's Women's Health and Wellness Institute in Santa Monica. Experience care designed by women, for women, in a 7,000 square foot women-centric facility that blends medical expertise with education and holistic support. Whether you need well women exams, maternity care, mental health resources, or educational workshops, Providence St. John's has you covered, with your own patient navigator and commitment to empowering you through every stage of life. Call 833-34-HER and make your health a priority.
When you advertise in the Santa Monica Daily Press, you're doing two things at once, supporting local journalism and putting your business in front of the most engaged audience in town. Our readers live, work, and spend here. Print, web, and newsletters, we are trusted by thousands every single day. That means your ad drives calls, clicks, and customers while showing your commitment to the community. Support local news, grow your business. Advertise with the Santa Monica Daily Press. Come on, Jimmy, let's go. It's a beautiful morning in Santa Monica, and I'm doing what I do most mornings. I'm walking my dog. Her name is June. He's visiting her friends there. All very friendly. The local rescue told us she was a pit lab mix and would grow to be about 60 pounds. So, of course, she's a pit husky boxer mix and weighs 95 pounds. So I'm heading south on 16th Street, past the pool at Santa Monica College, walking toward Pearl Street, which is one of the main arteries that cuts through my neighborhood, which is called Sunset Park. Come on, Jude. She's trying to eat the microphone. Sunset Park is one of Santa Monica's largest neighborhoods. It's called that because it's up a hill, has a great view of the ocean and the epic sunsets. There are approximately 7,000 homes here, both single-family and apartments, and around 14,000 people live in them. If you want to imagine what the 9,000 units called for in the sixth housing element might look like, one way to think about it is adding the equivalent of Sunset Park plus 2,000 more homes to the city. It's little wonder that the new housing element was controversial from the start.
There were many advocates in the city who were saying, wait a minute, fight this.
This is Phil Brock, a longtime local politician and a former city council member, easily recognizable for his Brock the Vote campaign lawn signs.
Why are we a city that's being radically raised in the housing element when in the past we've always exceeded our mandate? So if we were behind in our mandate and we were falling short, Beverly Hills in the last cycle had to build 3 units and failed. Now, look, that's ridiculous. And Beverly Hills should have been penalized. But Santa Monica, in every single cycle, we had exceeded the mandate given. And then we end up with 4 times as much. Well, residents were screaming, wait, slow this train down. Let's be reasonable. It didn't mean fight the whole thing, or at least I wouldn't have fought the whole thing, but I felt there had to be a midpoint. There had to be a moment of sanity.
Housing element negotiations between the state and the city had begun in 2019, 2 years before the new sixth element was finalized. According to Matt Hall, most of the time this process is a pro forma slam dunk.
So how the sausage is actually made when it comes to housing elements. You've got staff members, and they're subject matter experts. They've been doing this for as long as they've been employed. And they go back and forth with the state regulators and say, hey, if we do X, do we pass? If we do Y, do we pass? And they build a draft housing element that is largely pre-approved by the state regulators. So by the time this document is given to any number of elected officials, the staff members are confident it's already going to be compliant, that they would be remiss in their jobs to present a non-compliant element to the decision makers. Now, they always leave some room in the margins, right? Elected officials always need to appear to be doing something important. So they give them a certain amount of flexibility to play in the margins and say, hey, I did this, I cut this one, I increased this one, I've made a difference here. They always allow for that. But the important point is, by the time a regulator sees it, it should already be compliant.
As a council member, Gleam Davis saw this back and forth firsthand.
So that process begins in the city with staff looking at it. They look at every parcel in the city. They come up with a map, and they say, these are the parcels we think are likely to be redeveloped during the housing element, and this is the level they have to be redeveloped to in order to generate that amount of housing. And that's a back and forth, and it first goes to the Planning Commission, and then it bounces back and forth between staff and Planning Commission a little bit. And then once the majority of the Planning Commission agrees that this is what we should do, it then comes to council, and that process starts all over again.
Still, there was reportedly some confusion in City Hall during this time about the city's responsibilities. To be clear, the government of Santa Monica doesn't actually have to build anything.
The city does not need to build the housing. What the city essentially has to do is lay the groundwork for others to build the housing. So what the city has to do is zone a sufficient number of parcels within the city in such a way that they can accommodate the building of sufficient housing to meet those target numbers. And that's where the rubber hits the road.
Remember that Gleam Davis is a housing advocate. Other members of the 2019 council were too. They were satisfied with the 9,000 units. Phil Brock, who was elected to the council in 2020, was not.
That council, not all the council, but members of the council advocating for a radical increase in the housing element, I think that did a disservice to the people of the city. And if I was on the city council, we wouldn't have done that. And that doesn't mean by any means I would have advocated for zero. Look, you have to have some transformation, some change, because cities are indeed a living, breathing organism.
And so is a city council. This is Matt Hall again.
In Santa Monica, we've got 7 council members. And this is true anywhere. You have offset elections, right? So one year you elect some folks, and 2 years later you elect other folks. So when Phil was elected, he was part of a group that came in with different priorities. They didn't necessarily have the same politics as their predecessors. So when they were given the opportunity to play in those margins and make some changes to the housing element, they certainly did, but they took it in a direction that maybe staff weren't expecting and was different from what had been anticipated.
Disagreements among the members of the city council led to changes by staff, which then led to more meetings with state regulators. And all of that led to delays.
We rejected the first iteration of the housing element and asked for some changes. Staff went, negotiated with HCD, negotiated with the state over a period of months.
I voted against our housing element the first 2 times because one of the new components that was added in the last cycle was affirmatively furthering fair housing, which meant that you not only had to build housing, but you had to build affordable housing in the most resource-rich areas. And I didn't feel that our first 2 proposals met that goal.
The problem was that once the city council voted on a housing element plan, the state still needed to approve it. Instead, the state would reject Santa Monica's plan twice. Reworking it would take many months, months in which the city would be, technically speaking, out of compliance. In past housing elements, being out of compliance hadn't been a big deal. But this time would be different. This time, a non-compliant housing element would create a problem for Santa Monica that was not only big, it was unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever occurred in the state of California before.
It was kind of a mythical danger. It was something that was on paper that no one had ever believed would happen, right? Like sea monster of ye old navigation. That's kind of what it was like.
Once the Department of Housing and Community Development said, wait a minute, we're not just going to rubber stamp whatever you send to us, now it all of a sudden became a very potent weapon.
You are not following state law. If you don't do these things right, we will come down and do it to you.
That's in the next episode of A Developing Story. But before you click on that next episode, please give the series a rating. 5 stars is, of course, appreciated. You can also leave a review. The more ratings and reviews, the more people will listen. Thanks.
A Developing Story is a limited podcast series from Santa Monica Daily Press. The series was created, written, and hosted by Brian Peter Falk. The series was produced by Brian, Matthew Hall, and Ross Furukawa. It was edited and mixed by Alan Kraut. Original music by Brian and Alan. If you have a question or comment, you can email the series at podcast@smdp.com.